A full year into the partnership between humanity and the Coalition, the Devourers launched their most devastating offensive yet. 3 core worlds came under simultaneous attack, including the industrial centers that supplied most of Coalition military production. The scale of the assault was beyond anything previously imagined, involving millions of Devourer warriors supported by massive hive ships that blotted out entire star systems. The human response to this existential threat revealed the final truth that would forever change Zexthai's understanding of their species. When other Coalition races began discussing evacuation protocols and defensive fallback positions, the humans volunteered for the most dangerous assignments without hesitation or apparent fear. Captain Susan Hayes requested command of the defense at Proxima Station, where the Coalition's primary shipyards were located. The facility was essentially indefensible against the incoming Devourer fleet, but Hayes insisted that losing those production capabilities would doom the entire war effort. Major Pete Anderson simultaneously coordinated ground forces on 3 different worlds, somehow maintaining tactical awareness across multiple battlefields while personally leading combat operations on each planet. Zexthai found himself assigned to observe a human marine unit that had been cut off behind enemy lines on the planet Novus Prime. The Marines were commanded by Captain Alex Turner, whose reputation for impossible missions had made him a legend among Coalition forces. The unit's mission was simple in concept but devastating in its implications: hold an indefensible position for as long as possible while protecting civilian evacuation convoys. For 2 weeks, Zexthai watched as the Marines pushed themselves beyond any reasonable limits of endurance. They were outnumbered by more than 50 to 1, cut off from resupply, and facing an enemy that never tired or retreated. Any rational military force would have attempted to break through enemy lines and rejoin friendly units, accepting civilian casualties as an unfortunate necessity. The humans refused to abandon their position. Corporal Sam Mitchell continued fighting, with a shattered leg. Supported by improvised crutches his squad mates had fashioned from debris, Private Rachel Stone created explosive devices from medical supplies and meal rations, turning their dwindling resources into weapons with an ingenuity that defied military logic. Sergeant Joe Clark coordinated orbital fire support while suffering from severe blood loss, refusing medical evacuation until the last civilian transport had cleared the danger zone. Zexthai observed their actions with growing amazement and horror. The Marines were systematically destroying themselves to protect people they had never met and would never see again. They made these sacrifices without drama or ceremony, as if dying for strangers was simply another aspect of their professional duties. The moment that shattered Zexthai's understanding of human nature came when the unit's youngest member volunteered for a mission that could only end in death. Private Kevin James was barely 18 standard years old, recruited from a farming colony that had joined the Coalition only months before the war began. He should have been attending educational institutions or learning civilian trades, not calculating acceptable losses in desperate military operations. The Devourer forces had finally broken through their outer defenses and were advancing toward the civilian evacuation site. Turner's Marines had held their impossible position for 2 weeks, but their ammunition was exhausted, and their casualties were mounting beyond sustainability. The only way to prevent the aliens from reaching the evacuation convoy was to call in orbital bombardment on their own position. Someone had to remain behind to guide the targeting systems and ensure accuracy. The mission required staying within the blast radius to maintain communication with the orbital platforms until the moment of impact. It was suicide disguised as tactical necessity. James volunteered immediately. There was no hesitation in his voice, no dramatic speech about honor or duty. He simply stated that he was the logical choice because he had the least combat experience and would be missed least by the unit. Turner accepted his reasoning with the same calm professionalism that characterized every human military decision Zexthai had witnessed. As James prepared for his final mission, he displayed the same methodical competence that all humans seemed to bring to their duties. He checked his communications equipment twice, reviewed the targeting coordinates with Turner, and confirmed the timing of the orbital strike. His preparation was as thorough as if he were planning a routine patrol rather than his own death. The conversation between James and Turner before the mission began revealed the aspect of human nature that would haunt Zexthai for the rest of his life. James asked Turner to deliver a personal message to his family, but the content was not about military honor or heroic sacrifice. He wanted his parents to know that he hoped his little sister would do well in her school play, and he asked his mother not to be too sad about his death because he had chosen it freely. James walked into certain death with the same casual professionalism that other humans showed when cleaning their weapons or filing mission reports. There was no grand gesture or emotional breakdown, just a young human accepting that his death was tactically necessary and proceeding accordingly. The orbital bombardment eliminated the advancing Devourer forces and saved thousands of civilian lives. Zexthai realized in that moment that he had been fundamentally wrong about what made humans terrifying. It was not their capacity for violence or their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. Many species possessed those qualities in various degrees. The true horror lay in their ability to remain fundamentally human while making inhuman decisions. James had died not as a warrior seeking glory or a fanatic following ideology, but as a caring young person who wanted his sister to succeed in her school activities and his mother to find happiness despite his loss. He had retained every aspect of normal human compassion and emotional connection, while calmly calculating that his death would produce the best tactical outcome. This psychological flexibility was beyond anything Zexthai had encountered in his decades of military service. Humans could love deeply while planning operations that would cause immense suffering. They could weep over individual casualties while coordinating strategies that would create thousands more. They could maintain their essential humanity while becoming perfect instruments of warfare. The evacuation of Novus Prime succeeded because of James's sacrifice and the determination of his unit. Turner's remaining Marines rejoined coalition forces and immediately requested assignment to the next desperate mission. They processed their grief and trauma exactly as they processed every other aspect of their military experience, filing it away as completed business and focusing on the next tactical challenge. During the transport back to Coalition space, Turner sat beside Zexthai and spoke quietly about his lost Marines. The human captain knew the names of every soldier who had died under his command, could recite details about their families and personal histories, and carried photographs of their loved ones in his personal equipment. Yet he was already studying intelligence reports for the next mission, preparing to make similar decisions with the same calm professionalism. Zexthai asked Turner how humans could function normally after experiencing such losses. The captain's response was simple and devastating. They had learned to carry the weight of necessary violence without letting it destroy their capacity for love and hope. This was not because they were naturally callous, but because they had become experts at preserving their humanity while doing terrible things to protect what they cared about. The conversation revealed that humans had been fighting wars throughout their entire evolutionary history. They had developed psychological mechanisms for dealing with the moral contradictions of warfare that other species could barely comprehend. They could commit genocide and plan birthday parties with equal emotional engagement because they had learned to compartmentalize different aspects of their nature without losing access to any of them. That night, Zexthai wrote the longest entry in his personal log since beginning his assignment with human forces. He documented his growing realization that humans were not simply another warrior species, but something fundamentally different from anything else in the galaxy. They were simultaneously the most caring and most dangerous beings he had ever encountered, capable of infinite compassion and infinite ruthlessness depending on what the situation required. 3 months of joint operations had passed when Zexthai first began to notice the disturbing patterns in human behavior that would forever change his understanding of warfare. The Battle of Kepler Station started like any other engagement against Devourer forces, but it ended with Zexthai questioning everything he thought he knew about military logic. The Devourers had launched a massive assault on Kepler Station, one of the Coalition's primary research facilities in the Outer Territories. The station housed over 50,000 civilian researchers and their families, making it a priority target for both sides. Zexthai commanded the defensive fleet alongside Admiral Morrison, coordinating their ships against the incoming swarm. Lieutenant Andy Cooper led a squadron of 12 human fighters against impossible odds. The Devourers had brought over 100 attack craft, and the tactical computers showed Cooper's squadron facing certain annihilation if they engaged directly. Standard coalition doctrine called for fighters to withdraw when outnumbered more than 3-1, preserving pilots and equipment for more favorable engagements. Cooper requested permission to attack anyway. Morrison granted it without hesitation. Sexthi watched through the tactical display as Cooper's squadron dove into the Devourer formation. The humans had developed a technique they called a coordinated strike, where all fighters would target the same enemy ship simultaneously before breaking apart and regrouping. It was wasteful and dangerous by Veltari standards, but it worked with devastating effectiveness. The squadron managed to destroy 30 Devourer ships before the aliens adapted to their tactics. Then the real horror began. Instead of withdrawing, as any rational military unit would do, Cooper's remaining 6 fighters continued their attack. They had switched to what they casually called kamikaze runs, ramming their ships directly into Devourer vessels to maximize damage. When the engagement ended, only 2 of Cooper's pilots had survived. The human response to losing 10 pilots was not grief or anger, but a sort of casual acceptance that disturbed Sexthi deeply. Pilot Jenny Franklin, one of the survivors, actually joked about buying the farm while reviewing the mission footage with her replacement pilots. The way humans discussed death as simply another tactical option was unlike anything Sexthi had encountered. The Veltari had honored traditions of noble sacrifice in battle, but it was always treated with appropriate gravity and ceremony. Humans seemed to view dying for their cause as just another part of their job, no more significant than filing reports or maintaining equipment. Even more unsettling was their capacity for violence when the situation demanded it. 2 weeks after Kepler Station, Devourer forces captured a coalition research outpost in the Vega system. Standard protocol designated the facility and its personnel as acceptable losses, since mounting a rescue would cost more lives than it would save. The Coalition High Command wrote off the researchers and prepared to establish a new facility elsewhere. The humans disagreed with this decision in the strongest possible terms. Colonel Steve Barnes requested permission to mount a rescue operation. When permission was denied, he launched the mission anyway, taking volunteers from the human contingent and any coalition soldiers willing to ignore direct orders. Sexthi joined the unauthorized mission as an observer, partly to document human tactical methods and partly because he found himself curious about their motivations. The rescue force included Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, a demolitions expert whose quiet competence had impressed even veteran Veltari warriors during previous engagements. The assault on the captured research station revealed another aspect of human nature that would haunt Sexthi for years afterward. Rodriguez moved through the facility with mechanical precision, eliminating Devourer guards with a level of cold efficiency that made seasoned coalition soldiers uncomfortable. There was no rage or bloodlust in her actions, just systematic professional violence applied with terrifying skill. But the real horror began when they discovered what the Devourers had been doing to their prisoners. The aliens had been conducting experiments on the captured researchers, trying to understand coalition physiology for their own tactical purposes. The scenes in the research labs were beyond anything most civilized species could stomach. Sexthi watched as something fundamental changed in the human rescue team. Their tactical communications became shorter and more focused. Private Jimmy Chen moved from room to room with the same methodical approach Rodriguez had used. But now, there was an underlying current of controlled fury that seemed to make him more effective rather than less disciplined. Captain Nick Thompson led the main assault team deeper into the facility, coordinating the rescue with the same professional competence he had shown in routine operations. The contrast between his calm leadership and the systematic destruction his team was inflicting on their enemies was deeply disturbing to Sexthi's understanding of how sentient beings should respond to atrocity. The most unsettling moment came when Thompson's team discovered a group of young Devourers in the station's lower levels. The aliens were not yet mature enough to be combatants, but coalition doctrine treated all Devourers as potential threats regardless of age. Most species would have eliminated them without question, Thompson instead ordered them secured and transported to Coalition custody for study and potential rehabilitation. The decision came immediately after his team had systematically killed every adult devourer in the facility with ruthless efficiency. The contradiction between his compassion for enemy young and his methodical destruction of enemy adults was something Zexthai could not reconcile with his understanding of rational behavior. The rescue mission succeeded beyond all expectations. Every surviving researcher was recovered, and the intelligence gathered from the facility proved invaluable for future operations. The human volunteers returned to their units and resumed normal duties as if nothing extraordinary had happened. During the post-mission debriefing, Colonel Barnes discussed the operation in purely tactical terms. He analyzed what had worked well and what could be improved for future missions. There was no mention of the moral weight of their actions or the emotional cost of what they had witnessed. The humans seemed to have processed the entire experience and filed it away as simply another completed assignment. Zexthai found himself unable to sleep that night. He kept thinking about Rodriguez's mechanical efficiency in combat and Thompson's casual decision to spare enemy young while ordering the deaths of enemy adults. The humans seemed to possess an ability to compartmentalize their actions in ways that defied everything he understood about how conscience and combat psychology should work. In his private log, Zexthai wrote his first entry expressing concern about human military methods. He noted that while their effectiveness could not be questioned, their psychological approach to warfare was unlike anything in coalition databases. The humans seemed to lack the normal emotional limitations that prevented other species from committing certain acts, yet they retained enough moral sense to make ethical distinctions that even some coalition species would ignore. What disturbed him most was not that humans were more violent than other species, but that they were more adaptable. They could become whatever the situation required without seeming to suffer the psychological damage that such flexibility should inflict. Rodriguez could kill with mechanical precision 1 hour and tend to wounded comrades with genuine compassion the next, as if both actions were equally natural expressions of her character. Zexthai was beginning to understand that humans were not simply another warrior species like his own people. They were something fundamentally different, something that could hold contradictory truths simultaneously and act on whichever one served their purposes at any given moment. This realization was the beginning of a terror that would only grow deeper as he continued to observe them in combat. 6 months after first contact, the war against the Devourers took a darker turn that would reveal the true depths of human adaptability. The alien hive mind had begun targeting civilian populations directly, abandoning their previous focus on military and industrial targets in favor of terror attacks designed to break coalition morale. The strategy forced coalition leadership to confront moral questions that had never before been necessary in their centuries of civilized warfare. Other coalition species struggled with the implications of total war. The Veltari had strict codes, governing the treatment of non-combatants, while the Thraxians refused to target breeding populations under any circumstances. Even the normally pragmatic Kandari expressed reservations about the escalating brutality of the conflict. The humans adapted to the new reality with disturbing ease. Admiral Jake Morrison proposed a strategy that sent shockwaves through coalition high command during a meeting Zexthai attended as military observer. Morrison suggested surgical strikes against Devourer breeding worlds, targeting their nurseries before the young could mature into warriors. He presented detailed tactical analyses, showing how such operations could end the war in months rather than years, potentially saving millions of coalition lives. When other species representatives objected to what they saw as genocide, Morrison calmly responded with statistical projections. Every day the war continued meant more civilian casualties on both sides. The most efficient way to minimize total deaths was to eliminate the Devourer's ability to produce new soldiers. His presentation was methodical, logical, and utterly without emotional appeal. The moral weight of the proposal seemed to affect Morrison no more than planning a routine supply mission. He answered questions about operational details with the same professional competence he brought to every aspect of military planning. When asked directly about the ethical implications of targeting non-combatants, He simply stated that the survival of coalition civilization took precedence over philosophical concerns about enemy children who would grow up to consume entire star systems. Zexthai volunteered to observe one of these missions firsthand, partly from professional curiosity and partly from a growing need to understand how humans could make such decisions without apparent psychological cost. He was assigned to accompany a human black operations team led by Commander Rick Davis, whose reputation for completing impossible missions had earned respect throughout coalition forces. Davis's team included specialists whose casual competence in their deadly fields had become legendary among coalition military personnel. Corporal Lisa Park was a demolitions expert who could create devastating explosives from common household materials. Staff Sergeant Carl Wilson was a sniper whose accuracy had become the subject of stories that other species assumed were exaggerated until they witnessed his skills directly. Petty Officer Tony Garcia served as both combat medic and infiltration specialist, equally skilled at saving lives and taking them. The target was a Devourer breeding facility on the planet designated HD 1C4595C, a world that housed approximately 50,000 immature aliens in various stages of development. Intelligence indicated that the facility would produce over 10,000 fully mature warriors within the next standard year, all of whom would be deployed against coalition civilian targets. During the mission briefing, Zexthai observed how each team member processed the moral implications of their assignment differently. Park approached it as a technical challenge, discussing payload requirements and structural vulnerabilities as if they were planning to demolish an abandoned building, rather than a nursery. Wilson focused entirely on protecting his team, analyzing potential threats and escape routes without apparent concern for the broader implications of their target. Garcia spent extra time reviewing medical supplies and emergency procedures, preparing to treat wounded team members or potentially injured enemies with equal professionalism. Davis carried the full weight of command responsibility, making decisions that would haunt any rational being while maintaining the operational effectiveness necessary for mission success. The infiltration proceeded according to plan. The team moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, placing charges at structural weak points while avoiding Devourer security patrols. Zexthai found himself both impressed by their tactical skills and disturbed by their emotional detachment from the magnitude of destruction they were preparing to unleash. The most unsettling moment came when they encountered a group of nearly mature Devourers in one of the facility's upper levels. The aliens were perhaps weeks away from full combat readiness, already showing signs of the aggressive instincts that made their species so dangerous. Standard procedure called for immediate elimination of potential threats. Wilson dispatched them with precise shots that prevented any alarm being raised. Garcia immediately moved to check for survivors, not from compassion but from professional thoroughness. Park continued placing charges without pause, treating the encounter as simply another obstacle to mission completion. Davis coordinated their actions while calculating the tactical implications of the delay. None of them showed any emotional response to killing beings that were essentially adolescents by Devourer standards. The action was performed with the same casual professionalism they brought to every aspect of their duties, as if the moral weight of their actions had been surgically removed from their psychological processing. The facility was destroyed exactly as planned. 50,000 potential Devourer warriors died in the carefully coordinated explosions that Davis's team had engineered. The mission was tactically perfect, strategically necessary, and morally devastating by the standards of every coalition species, except humans. During the extraction, Zexthai overheard a conversation between Davis and Garcia that would haunt him for years afterward. The two humans were discussing personal matters with the same emotional engagement that most beings reserved for significant life events. Davis mentioned his daughter's upcoming birthday party and his concern about finding an appropriate gift. Garcia talked about his anniversary dinner with his spouse and their plans for a vacation after the current deployment ended. These same individuals, who had just participated in the systematic elimination of thousands of enemy young, were planning celebrations and romantic gestures as if they had spent the day performing routine administrative duties. The disconnect between their capacity for necessary evil and their fundamental humanity was something Zextai's mind could barely process. Back, aboard the Coalition transport, Davis filed his mission report with characteristic thoroughness and professionalism. He noted tactical successes, areas for improvement in future operations, and recommendations for equipment modifications. The death of 50,000 beings was recorded as simply another data point in the ongoing war effort. The conversation during the return journey revealed another aspect of human psychology that disturbed Zextai profoundly. The team members discussed their actions in purely tactical terms, analyzing what had worked well and what could be refined for future missions. There was no discussion of guilt, remorse, or moral uncertainty. They had processed the experience, learned from it, and filed it away as completed business. Zextai realized that humans possessed a psychological flexibility that bordered on the supernatural. They could commit acts that would shatter the minds of other species while retaining their capacity for love, creativity, and moral reasoning. They could compartmentalize necessary evil in ways that preserved their humanity, while enabling them to function as perfect instruments of warfare. The true horror was not that humans were naturally violent or cruel, but that they were naturally adaptable. They could become whatever the situation required without losing the essential qualities that made them worth defending. This ability to hold contradictory truths simultaneously and act on whichever one served their immediate purpose was beginning to terrify Zextai in ways he could not fully articulate. In his private log that night, he wrote his first entry questioning whether the Coalition truly understood what they had allied themselves with in humanity. Zextai stood in the observation deck of Coalition Station Alpha, watching the human ships arrive through the void of space. The vessels looked ordinary compared to the sleek Veltari cruisers or the massive Thraxian battleships already docked at the station. These human ships had simple lines and basic armor plating that seemed almost primitive by galactic standards. As the senior Veltari military advisor on the station, Zextai had seen dozens of species request membership in the Galactic Coalition over his long career. Most came seeking protection from the Devourers, the hive mind species that had been consuming entire star systems along the galaxy's outer rim for the past decade. The humans were no different in that regard. Admiral Jake Morrison stepped out of the lead transport first, followed by Commander Lisa Chen and Captain Ben Rodriguez. Zextai studied them through the transparent barrier as they walked across the docking bay. They were smaller than most Coalition species, lacking the natural armor plating of his own people or the enhanced senses of the Kandari. Their skin looked soft and vulnerable, and they moved with what seemed like casual confidence rather than the rigid military bearing most species displayed when requesting alliance. The formal meeting took place in the Coalition's main conference chamber. Zextai sat with the other military advisors as the humans presented their request for membership. Morrison spoke clearly and directly about his species' situation. Earth had detected the Devourers moving toward their sector of space and wanted to join the Coalition's defense efforts rather than face the threat alone. What interested Zextai was not what the humans said, but how they said it. Most species came to the Coalition as supplicants, desperate and willing to accept any terms for protection. The humans negotiated like equals, offering their military capabilities in exchange for membership rather than simply begging for help. After the formal session, Zextai was assigned as the humans' liaison officer. His job was to evaluate their combat capabilities and recommend whether they deserved full military partnership or should be relegated to support roles. The Coalition had learned long ago that some species were better suited for logistics and manufacturing than frontline combat. The first thing that struck Zextai during his initial briefings with the human officers was their emotional openness. Captain Rodriguez spoke fondly of his crew aboard the UCS Defiance, referring to them by first names and sharing personal stories about their backgrounds. Commander Chen talked about her engineers as if they were family members rather than subordinates. This level of personal attachment was unusual among professional military units in Zextai's experience. The Veltari had long ago learned that emotional bonds in combat units led to poor tactical decisions. Soldiers who cared too deeply about their comrades would make choices based on feeling rather than logic. potentially compromising entire missions to save individual lives. The humans seem to have missed this basic military principle entirely. During the first week of joint training exercises, Zexthai observed the humans working alongside coalition forces. Private Danny Walsh had somehow developed an emotional attachment to his rifle, which he had named Betsy and spoke to during maintenance periods. Sergeant Katie Adams treated her squad of mixed-species soldiers like a protective parent, constantly checking on their welfare and ensuring they had adequate rest and nutrition. The behavior puzzled Zexthai but did not immediately concern him. Many younger species had quirks that they eventually outgrew through proper military discipline. What mattered was combat effectiveness, and that would be tested soon enough. The first real test came 3 weeks later during a patrol mission in the contested Riel sector. Devourer scouts had been detected near a coalition mining operation, and a mixed force of human and Veltari ships was dispatched to investigate. Zexthai commanded the operation from his cruiser, while Captain Rodriguez led the human contingent in the Defiance. The engagement began typically enough. The Devourer scouts attacked in their usual swarm pattern, trying to overwhelm the coalition ships through sheer numbers. Zexthai directed the battle according to standard tactical doctrine, using his ship's superior firepower to eliminate threats while maintaining formation integrity. Everything changed when Corporal Mike Torres, a human gunner aboard one of the escort frigates, was wounded by a Devourer plasma blast that breached his ship's armor. The logical response was to continue the engagement while the ship's medical officer attended to the casualty. Instead, the entire human formation began shifting to protect the damaged vessel, even though it put them in tactically disadvantageous positions. Zexthai watched in amazement as Doc Peterson, the human fleet medic, requested permission to transfer between ships during active combat to treat Torres personally. When his request was denied due to safety protocols, Peterson argued directly with Morrison over the communication channel, insisting that no human would be abandoned while he could still help. The Devourers pressed their attack, sensing weakness in the coalition formation. Zexthai expected the humans to follow standard procedure and maintain their assigned positions. Instead, they began moving to cover each other in ways that defied tactical logic, but demonstrated something Zexthai had never seen before in combat. When the engagement ended with all Devourer scouts destroyed, Zexthai reviewed the battle recordings. The humans had taken unnecessary risks to protect a single wounded soldier, yet their unconventional tactics had actually improved their overall effectiveness. They fought not just as individuals following orders, but as a coordinated group that adapted instantly to protect their most vulnerable members. During the post-battle debriefing, Torres thanked his crewmates for their actions. The response from Sergeant Adams was simple and direct: "We don't leave people behind." The statement was delivered without drama or ceremony, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. That night in his quarters, Zexthai wrote his first report on human military capabilities. He noted their adequate technology and standard training levels, but found himself struggling to categorize their tactical approach. The humans had demonstrated both reckless disregard for proper procedure and remarkable combat effectiveness. They formed emotional bonds that should have weakened their military units but somehow seemed to strengthen them instead. He concluded his report with a recommendation for continued observation. The humans were certainly different from other coalition species, but whether that difference would prove advantageous or dangerous remained to be seen. What Zexthai did not realize was that he had just witnessed the first glimpse of something that would eventually teach him the true meaning of terror. The war against the Devourers ended 18 months after human involvement began, faster and more decisively than anyone in coalition leadership had thought possible. The victory came not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through human strategic innovations and their willingness to make choices that other species found psychologically impossible. In the aftermath of the final battle, Zexthai observed something that completed his transformation from curious observer to genuinely terrified witness. The humans who had spent over a year committing acts of calculated brutality in service of coalition survival transitioned back to peacetime with the same casual efficiency they had brought to warfare. The change was immediate and complete. Captain Alex Turner, who had ordered countless tactical strikes during the siege of Novus Prime, requested assignment to humanitarian missions on the worlds his forces had helped liberate. Doc Garcia, who had performed field surgery under enemy fire for months while treating both coalition and enemy wounded, established a civilian medical clinic on one of the recovered planets. Private Rachel Stone, who had created improvised explosives from medical supplies during desperate battles, became a civil engineer designing schools and hospitals for refugee populations. Zexathai watched this transformation with growing unease. The humans were not struggling with post-combat psychological trauma, as other species would after such extended brutality. They were not requiring extended rehabilitation periods to readjust to civilian life. They simply switched from one mode of existence to another, as if changing uniforms, maintaining the same fundamental humanity that had somehow survived 18 months of systematic violence. The victory celebration on Coalition Prime provided Zexathai with his final conversation with Admiral Jake Morrison, the human leader whose strategic decisions had shaped the entire war. Morrison appeared relaxed and genuinely pleased by the outcome, but when Zexathai asked about the cost of victory, the Admiral's response revealed depths of human psychology that continued to disturb him. Morrison knew the name of every human who had died under his command during the war. He carried detailed files containing photographs of their families, personal histories, and final communications. He had personally written letters to each bereaved household, accepting responsibility for their losses while explaining why those sacrifices had been necessary for coalition survival. The Admiral spoke about the war not in terms of strategic success or tactical innovation, but in personal terms that focused on individual costs rather than collective achievements. He mentioned James by name, describing the young Marine's final mission and its impact on civilian evacuation success. Morrison remembered details about James's family that he had never met, including his sister's school activities and his mother's concerns about his military service. What terrified Zexathai was not that Morrison carried this emotional weight, but that he carried it without apparent psychological damage. The human leader had made decisions that resulted in millions of deaths on both sides, had ordered operations that violated fundamental moral principles held by most coalition species, and had systematically eliminated an entire alien civilization to ensure human and coalition survival. Yet Morrison remained fundamentally the same caring individual who had first requested coalition membership for his species. He spoke about plans for post-war reconstruction with genuine enthusiasm, discussed cultural exchange programs between human and alien populations, and expressed concern about ensuring that former enemy territories received adequate humanitarian assistance. The contradiction was absolute and terrifying. Morrison could order the destruction of Devourer breeding worlds while planning educational exchanges with coalition species. He could calculate acceptable casualty rates for military operations while personally grieving for every individual loss. He could function as a perfect instrument of warfare while retaining complete access to normal human compassion and creativity. During their final conversation, Morrison explained that humans had been fighting wars throughout their entire evolutionary history. They had learned to compartmentalize the psychological costs of violence without losing their essential humanity, because survival had required both capabilities simultaneously. The ability to love and destroy with equal intensity was not a contradiction in human psychology, but a fundamental adaptation that had enabled their species to survive in a hostile universe. Morrison revealed that the most successful human military leaders were not those who embraced violence, but those who could commit necessary acts of brutality while maintaining their capacity for mercy, creativity, and hope. The combination of unlimited tactical flexibility and preserved moral reasoning made humans simultaneously the most valuable allies and the most dangerous potential enemies in the galaxy. Zexathai's understanding crystallized during this conversation. Humans were not terrifying because they were naturally violent or lacked normal moral constraints. They were terrifying because they possessed both conscience and ruthlessness in abundance, and had learned to weaponize even their virtues when survival was at stake. They could weep over individual casualties while planning operations that would create thousands more. They could show mercy to enemy children, while systematically eliminating enemy adults. They could transition from total war to humanitarian assistance without missing a psychological beat. This flexibility was beyond anything other species had developed because it required holding contradictory truths simultaneously and acting on whichever one the situation demanded. In his final report to Coalition High Command, Zexthai wrote that humans represented both the greatest asset and the greatest potential threat the galaxy had ever encountered. Their value as allies was unquestionable, but their psychological adaptability was so far beyond normal species parameters that predicting their behavior in future conflicts was essentially impossible. He recommended that coalition leadership maintain positive relationships with humanity at all costs, not because humans were naturally aggressive, but because they were naturally adaptable. A species that could transition from humanitarian aid workers to systematic eliminators of entire civilizations, depending on tactical requirements, was not something the galaxy wanted as an enemy. The final entry in Zexthai's personal log contained his most honest assessment of what he had learned during his time with human forces. He wrote that fighting beside humans had taught him that the most terrifying creatures in the universe were not those who lacked conscience or compassion, but those who possessed both qualities in abundance and had learned to deploy them strategically. Humans could become monsters when necessary and return to being the most caring, creative, and life-affirming beings in the galaxy without apparent psychological cost. They could love their enemies' children while killing their enemies' parents. They could sacrifice everything for strangers while calculating acceptable losses for friends. This contradiction was not a flaw in human psychology, but its most fundamental feature. Zexthai concluded that the galaxy was safer with humans as allies than it had ever been before, but he prayed that future generations would never give humanity cause to demonstrate their adaptability from the opposite perspective. The species that had saved coalition civilization was also capable of destroying it with the same casual efficiency they brought to every other aspect of their existence. His final words captured the essential truth he had discovered about humanity. They were not the most violent species in the galaxy, nor the most peaceful, but they were certainly the most flexible. They could become whatever survival required while remaining fundamentally human, and that combination was simultaneously the most valuable and most terrifying force the universe had ever produced.